today about her years working alongside Charles Politz in the 70s and 80s, Jim McDonald, who will talk about his experience building up the American Advertising Museum with Byron, and finally Marilyn Murdoch will explore Bennet Norrbo's illustration, art, and dual personality. In doing research, interviewing folks who prepared for this event, I quickly learned that there was way too much information to cover in a short lecture. All three of these men spent 40 to 60 decades in Portland working as artists, illustrators, curators, critics, writers, inventors, and jokesters. So while this event may not cover everything, I hope it can ignite interest in our region's creative heritage and inspire curiosity. As much of their work is already lost, it is obvious to me now that a more thorough research, collection, and archive process should begin. And starting today, I hope to work further to capture and tell these stories. We're going to start with Charles Politz. Charles Politz said he was a native Portland West Sider, so deep-rooted that the house he was born in has long since become a parking lot. Charles Politz was born in Portland in 1923. He graduated from Lincoln High School and the University of Oregon School of Journalism. He started his career as a writer in Hollywood and later returned to Portland, where he worked as a freelance graphic designer. His first two jobs were designing the Oregon Blue Book and Oregon income tax forms. Very exciting. During his career, he worked for clients worldwide and local, including Portland Opera, Jantzen Inc., Hoffman Construction, Marty Zell and Associates, Salishan Lodge, Museum of Contemporary Craft, and Legacy Manual Hospital. From photographing and catalyzing Japanese architecture in 1958 to acting as an interior graphics design consultant for the Jefferson High School's faculty dining room, his resume reflects his diverse interests and life experiences. In 1959, at age 36, he was awarded the honor of designer, curator, and producer of the Oregon Centennial Photography Exhibit, which is the photo here. He is standing to the left in the black suit. Timothy Lee, mentee and friend of Charles, said, "When I first arrived in Portland, Charles Politz was already an icon for design, an accomplished and acknowledged classical master we youngsters spoke of in reverential voices. He was what we aspired to be. He got the assignments we hoped we would someday. He wore roll-collar shirts from Savile Row," which I'm not sure what that means, so you guys will have to enlighten me later. Savile? Savile. See? Savile. He did life drawings with a long stick. He traveled to Italy. He was respected and substantial. He defined good taste. We regarded him with wide and admiring eyes. And do you know what Charles did? From his lofty place, he reached down to us and brought us up. He looked at our portfolios and encouraged us. He took seriously our small efforts and projects. He participated in our groups, offering his skills where they would help. He welcomed us to be with him and actually seemed glad when we were. In so many ways, he helped us recognize ourselves to find a form and place. It was a precious and valuable gift. Roy Paul Nelson, longtime friend of Charles, said, "I met Charles, the classy Portland graphic designer, in the cartooning class sponsored by the Oregonian as a part of its Young Oregonians Club. We were both in grammar school then, but in widely separated parts of the city. Politz was a downtowner with a sophistication that dazzled me. He was also ambidextrous. He drew left-handed but wrote right-handed. This was because in school, his teachers insisted that he write with his right hand, as all the other students did. When he started freelancing, he worked out of his parents' home in Northwest Portland under the name Politz, O'Goggerty, and Raskolnikov. He figured the name would convey to his clients a surefire ethnic blend of talent at work on their projects. He was way ahead of his time. I got a note from Politz in the 1990s on his Politz, O'Goggerty, and Raskolnikov letterhead with its compelling slogan, "Consultants in Fine Advertising since 1947. His personal end-of-the-year greeting cards became collector's items and were featured in an AIJ exhibition. They span from years 1938 to 1997 and range from the amusing, like the announcement of a new home as a moon landing, to the political, a McCarthy-style investigative hearing featuring Santa and his reindeer. They reflect the zeitgeist of the times in which they were created. They also show his personal love for travel, like the Italy reference on the right, and his artistic influences. His interest in art developed over the years into a widely admired skill for drawing nudes, which sold steadily to collectors. His manner of drawing these black and white masterpieces was to lay a big sheet of paper on the floor. His tool was a long stick or worn-out brush. He dipped this tool into a jar of India ink and started drawing without benefit of any preliminary sketching. He dipped the tool, his irregular point produced a line that was full of surprises, thus adding to the beauty of his model's form. The work was further enhanced by the distance from the paper and the fact that he worked from a standing or slightly bent over position. The acceptance of these drawings always tickled him, Byron Ferris observed of his lifelong friend and colleague. He spent his life observing art and studying it. All the things he produced just shine with elegance. And with that, did I say everything?
Yes.
Sorry, Joan. My bio got a little lengthy. So I'd like to introduce Joan Campf, self-described as irascible in her youth. Joan paved the way for women in advertising in Portland. As a writer running her own firm, Joan Campf and Associates, she worked with small teams of designers and illustrators, including Charles, Bennet, and Byron, to tackle big clients and rake in awards in the 90s. Come on up, Joan.
So she said everything, so I'll be talking in a really short amount of time. What you really need to know about Charles is he was a gentleman and a gentleman, and he was a funny man, and he was a terrific designer, he was a terrific artist, and he, if you knew Charles, you knew that he stuttered. And he really suffered from that all his life. But when it got to his artwork, he never stuttered a bit. It was fluid and gorgeous and honest and real, and it came out of the inside of him. It either came out of the inside of him as a piece of elegance, or it came out of the inside of him as a piece of humor. He really could have ended up as a writer. He was a really talented writer, but I think the art bug just kind of took him down the road. I had the privilege of working with Charles for years and years and years, and loved every minute of it. You never knew what was going to be coming out of him. So a couple of pieces. So one of our clients was Emmanuel Hospital. This inelegant piece was a piece that went out to physicians at Emmanuel Hospital. And when I was hired to do this project and to come on as their advertising agency, they said to me, look, if we send this out to doctors, they never read it, they hate it, do something. So I interviewed a bunch of physicians at Emmanuel, and they said, okay, here's the deal. We don't have time. We don't have time to read this stuff. Look at all the junk on our desk, all the reports and all the blah, blah, blah. And I came back and I sat down with Charles and I said, I think they're wrong. I think the reason they don't read it is that it's pretty boring. So we decided to create something that was actually 20 pages long. Bennet was the designer, was the illustrator. Charles was the graphic designer. I was the writer. And what we did is, we did a series of stories that we knew doctors were talking about when they went out to lunch and dinner with each other. We talked about alcohol addiction among doctors. We did stories about orthopedic surgeons who didn't want to operate on AIDS people. We did stories we knew they were talking about in the back room. And suddenly, the piece, which went from one page to many pages, got read. And I think it got read because of the talent of Charles as a designer, the talent of Bennet as an illustrator, and the stories that really came out of the physicians at Emmanuel Hospital. So they then said, well, okay, this seems to be pretty successful. Here's what we send out this was a medical, this got turned around. The first one was community. So the first one actually went out to the community. This one went out to the medical staff. So they said, we send out this newsletter to the community, and we don't think it's very good. What can you do? So I was wandering around the hospital one day, and I was in the kids unit, which of course now is Randall Hospital. And all along the walls were these fabulous pieces that children had done. So I asked the hospital if I could take them off the walls. Took them off the walls, came back, sat down with Charles and said, Charles, this is what we need to do. We need to make a newspaper that is really going to feel like this community. And so the first one was entitled Kids and Family. And there's some examples of it in the back. This is another drawing that was up on the wall. Charles just went nuts with this. He said, they're better than anything I could ever do. So one was the front of the newspaper, one was the back. So the stories that we did, again, sort of like the physician piece, were real stories. You know, they were not nice stories. They were about, in this case, this one was about abused people, people with addiction. We did stories about children who died. We did stories about children who lived through certain things. But we just told it all. Just told the whole piece. And I think what happened is people really began to understand that Emmanuel wasn't just a knife and gun club. If you're an old Portlander, you'll remember the news always at 5 o'clock about who got knifed and who got shot in Northeast Portland, and they'd be hauled off to Emmanuel Hospital. Here were these fabulous doctors, a great hospital, and they were the knife and gun club. And here was St. Vincent's, haughty St. Vincent's, who said, well, we don't practice medicine over there. So this was a way to say, these are great doctors, this is a great hospital, good things are happening, and we're going to tell you the truth. We're going to actually tell you real stories about real people. So these illustrations are a combination of Charles' work and Bennett's work. Then they said, well, that's cool. Well, what's next? And what we think on the left, my right, your left, they had, every month, they would introduce new physicians to the hospital medical staff. And they said, we send out these invitations and they're kind of boring and nobody comes. So I sat down with Charles and I said, Charles, could you design a front of famous physicians through history? Just your fabulous drawings. I gave him a list. Maybe 2 weeks later, he came back with stunning pieces. And so we did a whole series of these for, I think, about a year and a half. Then the medical staff came and said, well, how about us? So I made a long list of famous women through history. I gave it to Charles and I said, could you? And he, as only Charles could do, did this amazing job. So in the back, you'll see some of the work that Charles and I did together, some of the work he's done all by himself. I think when you look at his work and you kind of start thumbing through it, I think you're going to see one of the things that was just described about Charles, which is his elegance in design. Not only his elegance as a person, which was remarkable, but his elegance in design. He paid attention, careful attention. I mean, the people that I worked with, Erceg, who's sitting over here, and Bennet and Charles and all the names that were, These were guys who sat down at something you hardly hear anymore called the board, and they designed. They didn't design on a computer. When they said type at Gizi, which was one of the main type places in town, they actually would set, 2 or 3 kinds of typeface. Everything was done by hand. So when you look at these pieces, you may say, well, they're a little sleepy today, maybe they're not, blah, blah. Realize it was all done on the board, and it was done beautifully. You just couldn't make a mistake because there was no room for correction. You didn't have all of the computers to make all the corrections. You did all the corrections. One of the things I wanted to say about Charles that really wasn't said is, and you'll notice by some of his pieces, was his amazing sense of humor. He was a very, very funny man, and people would kid him that he looked like Alfred Hitchcock, and he kind of liked that. I think there was a kind of, sort of glorious sort of laughing about all of that. He took himself seriously in design, but he never took himself seriously as a human being. He was Charles Politz, and I think when you think of the name, Politz, O'Gargety, and Raskolnikov, if that doesn't tell you who that man was, nothing does. Who else would put that on their business card, would go around and introduce himself with that, and he stuttered. See if he could get that all out, Politz, O'Gargety, and Raskolnikov, stuttering, not easy. Not easy at all, but he persevered through the stuttering, he persevered by the embarrassment of that, and out of that came some of the most beautiful, pure design that I think this city has ever seen. Thank you.
Before I introduce Byron, I would like to share that I was lucky enough to have met Byron in 2008, and I asked him to submit a story to my book, Our Portland Story, Volume 1, and he did. The story he wrote was about Homer Groening, father of Matt Groening, Simpsons creator. And here it is, designed by Yvonne Perez Emerson. Who's here? So you can check out the story in Volume 1 in the back. It's on display if you want to read it. But yeah, it's all about Homer, and it's very nice. Advertising today displays examples of the professional artist's work more than any other field in art, Byron Ferris wrote in a 1955 magazine article geared at aspiring advertising artists. He goes on, in addition to understanding the craft of producing art for reproduction, the advertising artist must offer in his work a solution to communicating the advertiser's message to the reader. Finding these solutions and adding his own ideas and personality to his work can be very gratifying. The good commercial artist who expects to make progress never stops studying, whether regularly in classes, workshops, in studio groups, or on his own. In 1955, Byron was 34, and already he was president of the Portland Advertising Artists Guild and a freelance designer at 722 Cascade. In his 90 years of life, he played a major role in defining the emergent field of graphic design as a profession locally and nationally, and helped shape what it has become. He was born in 1921 in Portland. He drew his first cartoons for his classmates and for money at age 9. At Jefferson High School, class of 1939, he formed the Corny Cartoon Club with fellow classmates who later became artists and journalists. After graduation, he went to work for Portland's Paramount Printers, Adblock Advertising, and the Marshall Wells stores. Drafted into the U.S. Navy on his 22nd birthday, he produced a regular radio show and worked radar to keep the West Coast safe from invasion. In those years, he worked in the studio of Neil Sampson, who produced the Safeway logo, among many other famous national brands. By the late 40s, he began what would prove to be a career as a successful freelance designer, working alongside the likes of Homer Grady. In 1959, he began as a design and letter form instructor at the Museum Art School, which is now PNCA. So this is a photo of PNCA faculty, and Byron is kind of towards the center by the statue, standing in front in a suit and tie. He met designers Dick and Jean Coyne in the mid-50s, and by the 60s became associate editor of Communication Arts magazine, the premier national and international journal of graphic design during the golden age of advertising. In 1966, Byron literally wrote the book about design, co-authoring a successful textbook called Fell's Guide to Commercial Art. And we have that on the back table there, you can peruse. In 1967, he joined Roger Bachman, and together they formed Byron Ferris. The best business decision I ever made, says Bachman. The firm's accounts included such clients as the Old Spaghetti Factory, Hanna International, and Port of Portland. The successful firm was eventually sold to McCann Erickson. During these years, Byron continued to write editorial content, judge design competitions for Communication Arts magazine, and serve as a trustee on the Museum Art Board. In 1979, with designers Charles Politz, Peter Thiel, and Robert Reynolds, he formed the firm Design Council, Inc., DCI, and together they worked for clients such as Willamette Industries, Pacific Power and Light, ZGF, and Boyd Coffee. There's a lot of DCI materials in the back there. In 1983, the Portland Ad Federation founded the American Advertising Museum, and Byron was a founding board member, and he created a historical timeline of American advertising. In addition to his professional work, Byron's creative spirit led him to pursue and secure several patents, including among them, and I hope I don't mispronounce this, Carol, Klimamasek. Oh gosh. Klimamasek, which is, for those of you who don't know, a hot nose, a cure to the common cold. He also invented an improved photo wheel for use by graphic designers. Byron was also a well-known punster. In his retirement, he created books such as Jokes for Grandkids and The Four Jeffs, about his adventures with his pals, and those are also on display. According to Carol Ferris, Byron believed that life as a designer meant carrying a dynamic curiosity and focus into all aspects of modern life. Byron was insatiably curious and widely read about many things, loved to travel, loved language, loved good food and wine, and yes, martinis. Oh, I was supposed to switch that slide. That was DCI. To talk about Byron, I would like to introduce Jim McDonald. Jim worked alongside Byron Ferris for years on the board of the American Advertising Museum. Jim is a CPA and a certified financial planner, or as Byron said, the juggler of the books.
Thank you, Melissa. I have no prepared remarks, lucky for you. I was called to fill in for Meridel Prideaux, who worked with Byron for years and years. She has the audacity to be traveling around Europe, so I'll bail her out now. Before I read the message that Meridel did pass on to read to you, I thought it'd be more appropriate if I shared with you an email that Carol Ferris sent to me this morning, and I didn't give her permission to read this. And forgive me, Byron, I'm reading this from my iPhone. Those of you who knew Byron knew that he was a bit of a curmudgeon when it came to technology. Computers were not one of his favorite things. But I think he will forgive me for doing this. So, my email from Carol this morning. Good morning. It's been quite an experience to walk through Byron's work and to think that somehow these pieces of paper can convey how big a life he lived. in the times in which he came to success, and to think that those times can be characterized by 21st century TV cartoons gives one pause. I hope that those who come tonight, perhaps looking for television slick, handsome, womanizing, cutthroat, martini-drinking admin, find something else. I hope they find the creative drive, the humor, the commitment to client service, the impeccability that puts Northwest Design on the national map as design and advertising grew into big businesses themselves. Yes, there was martini drinking, and yes, there were a few womanizers. But Byron, Charles, Homer, Bob Reynolds, Roger Bachman, and the bigs like Saul Bass and Lou Dorsman in New York City, Dick Coyne, founder of Communication Arts, and with his wife, Jean, and Jack Roberts in LA, to name just a few, all were devoted family men who loved their wives and families and supported them and were supported by them in their monster work ethics. They were also part of a larger community. Designers weren't isolated to the blue light of their computer screens yet, and designers were connected to the entire community through working relationships with photographers, engravers, typesetters, copy editors, writers, the cab drivers who ferried copy and proofs to and from the craftsmen to the accounts, and to the considerable expertise of the printing industry. Press check stories are some of the best you can hear about those times. This isn't nostalgia. It's the foundation on which today's design and ad business was built. You were there too, holding up the business end, and I'm so glad you'll be here to convey that. That was your message to me. Quite a compliment, thank you. With that, I'm going to offend Byron again and now read from my iPad. Because for some reason, I lost the email from Meridell on my phone, but it's here, I hope. Here we go. I was hired by Byron Ferris in 1969 and worked with Roger and Byron for 30 years. My favorite Byron story is on my first day on the job. He handed me artwork and told me to get a Velox. I had no idea what a Velox was and was too proud to ask. I think Meridell was probably, what, 20? Yeah. So I called a nice lady who sold printing and asked her what a Velox was and who was our vendor. She told me, and I proudly presented Byron with his Velox in record time. That secured my position with Byron for the rest of his life. We worked together on the old spaghetti factory account for 10 years. They are still using the logo he designed. He rented me space when I formed Purdue Sullivan Patterson. This was an advertising agency, which I'm sure a lot of you remember. And we worked together on the American Advertising Museum board. He instilled the love of travel in me, which is why I am in Paris and not with you. Byron is my hero, Meridell. Yes, my first introduction to Byron was as his accountant, his CPA. And by the way, I try to disguise myself to be more creative tonight. This is the best I can do. No, actually, I built my accounting practice around the creative community. My first client when I formed my own accounting practice when I was 31 years old was Gerber Advertising Agency. And I built my practice from that, and I did the design council tax work for a number of years, including Byron's personal tax return. And I did know Charles Politz, and I will attest to the fact that he was a very gentle man and a gentleman. These were great guys, and I really treasure that time working with them. I had to work hard to keep them out of jail, mind you. Just kidding, just kidding. But then later on, I had the honor to work with Byron on the board of directors for the American Advertising Museum. The museum was formed in the middle 80s. It was primarily a brainchild, as I recall, of Jack Matlack, who was then the executive director of the Portland Ad Federation. And he had probably the largest chunk of the museum collection. I think one of the stories I heard was the reason the Ad Museum was formed is because Jack's wife said, "Get this junk out of our house." They had to do something with it. But the Portland Advertising Museum was incredible. And I remember after I was recruited to serve on the board, and naturally they picked me to be the treasurer, I had to put together a budget for the next year for the board to review and to hopefully approve. And I was very serious. I'm an accountant after all. And I hope here that I can find the slide. But Byron, I learned that Byron could find a cartoon in the most boring subject matter. I went through my very serious presentation of the budget, and of course, if any of you have served on boards, and I'm sure you have, you don't necessarily look forward to having to read the board minutes when they come around. And when you go to the next meeting, they say, "Well, did everybody read the board minutes? Those who approved, say aye, yada, yada." Well, the secretary of the Ad Museum at the time was Homer Green. And needless to say, he found a way to make reading board minutes interesting. On top of that, Byron would sit there during the meeting, very quietly making sketches of other board members kind of under the conference table, and would incorporate them in the board minutes. So we all really look forward to reading the board minutes to see who might be presented. Well, right after I presented the budget, this came out. The fabulous McDonald juggling the books. I loved it. Now I have to say, it's true I had a mustache. It wasn't that sleazy. Close, but not quite there. But what I realized was what an incredible creative genius Byron was. And I got to know him better and better over the years after our Ad Museum involvement. I became close friends with him and Carol. And the man just had a way of seeing things that the rest of us mortals couldn't see. And I think this really captured it. He did this in a matter of a few minutes. So I called him when I saw this, and I said, "Byron," I said, "I love the caricature that you drew of me. Can I have the original copy?" He shows up the next day with it matted and framed for me. It's been in my office ever since. I treasure it. I can't speak at great length the way Joan spoke about Charles, because I didn't work with Byron in that capacity. So I would welcome anyone who did have that incredible opportunity to work with Byron, and come up here and tell a story. Anyone? Don't be bashful. Don't have any takers on that, so like I said earlier, you're lucky I didn't have any prepared remarks, but Byron always was an inspiration to me, and every time I look at that, it reminds me. Thank you.
And we will have time at the end. We're going to have a panel discussion, and there will be an opportunity for the audience to engage and ask questions and to share stories. So hold on to your thoughts. Bennet Norrbo. My three general aims are these: to be a thorn in the side of the avant-garde, to be a champion of the rights of you middle class, and last and certainly not least, to be society's darling. It is amusing to notice that these last and lowest of these ambitions are shared by all artists, no matter the persuasion, writes Bennet Norrbo. This quote hints at Bennet's conflicting ideas of what it is to be an artist in his playful and rebellious style. Friends relate that Bennet was at the same time crude, sensitive, and hilarious. A Portland resident since relocating as a child in 1938 from Minneapolis, Bennet made his mark on the Portland art world after graduating from the Museum Art School in San Francisco in the 1940s, though he regarded himself as principally self-taught. He worked as a successful freelancer for 15 years, working at one time or another on all of Portland's major advertising accounts, either directly or via advertising agencies. In 1970, he retired from commercial art and devoted his energies to being a visual artist. During his time as an illustrator, he took an office in Studio 1030, which was what we would call today a co-working space, full of other talented designers, photographers, and illustrators. Bennett's bio page from a 1960s Studio 1030 promotional pamphlet reads, "When an assignment calls for background art, sketches of Coldstream Guards, snake charmers, water skiers, Belgian shepherds, or the halls of the Louvre, Bennet Norrbo is summoned. Bennett's illustrations, beautiful in black and white or color, combine intricate detail with bold abstraction. He has won widespread acclaim for the artistry. Bennett's commercial art has adorned the advertising of many companies and organizations, including Sawyer's, U.S. National Bank of Portland, Portland General Electric, KGW-TV, Lippmann Wolf and Company, Myron Frank, Jantzen, and the Portland Symphony Society. Bennett is a fine artist as well, and had 2 paintings displayed in the 1960 Artists of Oregon exhibit. For information on how Bennet Norrbo's artwork can add drama to your advertising, phone Studio 1030. Bennett was also an author of numerous books, zines, what we would call zines, and comics. One zine, The Piddock Mansion Through the Ages, illustrates the completely fictional history of the Piddock Mansion. Written like a textbook, the zine outlines a Viking discovery, visits by the Chinese emperor, Bigfoot sightings, Martian invaders, and attacks by the animal Oregonius Jeffersonian Sacajasaurus, which looks exactly like a house cat. Cats also feature in his comic books, even earning a title role in Dead Cat comic series. One of his comic collections from the 90s is titled Darkness Over Beaverton, and it goes on to say on the title page, there is actually no such place as Beaverton, Oregon. Later in life, he became one of the most widely collected artists in the city of Portland. And to talk more about Bennett's life and life in art, I would like to introduce Marilyn Murdoch. Marilyn has played an integral role in Portland's art scene for decades through galleries, philanthropic endeavors, and frame shops, including her own Katayama framing. She was a longtime friend of Charles Politz and Bennet Norrbo and is executor of Bennett's collection.
Bennet Norrbo was my friend for maybe 8 years, so not all that long. And I'm happy to share my Bennet experiences with you. But all that I talk about tonight are my observations and my information that I've gleaned from his writings. Bennet didn't talk about deep things when we were together. He would rather joke around and attempt to shock me. But I grew up with 5 brothers and 2 sisters, and I'm not easily embarrassed. So here is a picture of Bennet at 20. It's a self-portrait, and you can tell he was a handsome man as well as a great portrait painter. He has his tools as symbols of his art in his art career. I'd like you to note that the brush is perpendicular to his center shirt line and his square shoulders, becoming the cross that he bore. His cross was his art. He loved it and hated it at the same time. He was constantly doodling, but then would tell me he was tired of the whole thing. I think the most dramatic thing in the painting is the division, the light and dark division. So right down the center, you've got his Gemini personality, half lit, half in darkness. I wouldn't go so far as to say it was Jekyll and Hyde, but that's a bit strong, but perhaps functionally bipolar, I'm not sure. This is when I met Bennet. Here he's in his 70s. He had stopped painting by the time that I met him, both as commercial and fine artist. You can see his combination of, I don't know if you can read what's written at the top, that it's written guilty artist. So it's his self-condemnation of his own work. The sight in a woman's hand, could be woman's hand, is pointed into a very tender region. Here too, he shows the tools of his trade. You might notice his shy eyes and the drawn face of sadness. He had a life with bright paints, fuzzy kitties, princesses, and all kinds of cute things that he created, but did not seem to dislodge a bitterness and an abandonment of the world. Humor was in everything, but so was a darkness. A quote from his writings: "All pictures are lies. Everything seen and heard and felt is either a lie or an illusion." This is a portrait of his father. You can see the likeness, similarity with himself. It's, again, a beautiful, beautiful portrait. Bennet said he spoke daily with his dad after his father's passing. His father was a financial wizard and left him with a considerable amount of money. Now this picture is one of himself in Minneapolis before they moved to Portland, with his parents at a movie theater. It's painted in bright neon colors, and we see the only known picture of his mother. And his father is the one confronting the viewer. This was Bennet's personal favorite painting. Neurathenia. This is what Bennet blamed for his shyness and his weakness. Neurathenia is a mental disease originating in the Industrial Revolution, wherein one experiences nervous exhaustion as a result of urban progress. The only hope for recovery is to stay away from the urban scene. This is one of his beautiful, beautiful landscapes. I really like this one. A token defect in the yard, some ruins, but he has this beautiful plane. Always had plane or a boat or a vehicle, automobile. He loved old examples of each one of those and did books about the aspects of the aerial plane and automobiles. What I think is interesting is Bennet lived in a stately home surrounded with mature gardens, thanks to his mother's nursery called Crestdale. He managed to keep the gardens up, but let the house go to rotten ruin. And the structure in the lower part of the painting, the box-like structures, is similar to something that appeared in his own yard. All parts of life had this dichotomy of personal life, neglect, and chaos, but then too his obsessive-compulsive behavior. Everything was sprinkled with humor, though. So you've heard about Studio 1030, where he worked as an illustrator, using classic images and graphic design, but he also was squeezed into postmodern simulations, with trivial products being granted vast importance, like needing the right sweater to make or break a golf game. Or a symbol can evoke intense emotion, like the chalice raised that you'll see back on in his little area. I'm seeing the 60s effect of transforming the viewer with promises of luxury and leisure and prestige, and ultimately he sold us the city of Portland. Bennet absolutely loved Portland. He called it the perfect city. And you've heard of his list of clients: Jantzen and Pendleton, Georgia Pacific, the Jesuit Society, the state of Oregon. In this picture, you see his drawing of himself put into his own ad, which I think is very, very clever. His commercial work was very well done, and he knew he was good at it. It was only human relations that were difficult for him. And so I think he had a 15-year career, and then gave it up for fine art. His fine art looked like this, and this, his darling little kitties. But it was true for his career. He was one of Portland's best-selling artists. I don't know if you're aware of that. He was prolific. He was very used to sell-out shows at Gallery West, Whitebird, and the Portland Art Museum rental sales. But still, for all his success, he couldn't attend his own shows without liquid encouragement. He attempted to break away from the cute and the fuzzy, but his audiences weren't so sure that they could support that. Bennet's abstractions I found to be stilted, and his serious landscape looked like Ivan Earle, very Disney-esque. His strong suit was showing people interacting, posturing, and narrating in the forms he gave them. Later in his career, Bennet longed to portray the other side of life, the one he enjoyed at night. The images usually involved guns, skeletons, mobsters, strip joints, brothels, illness, death, sex deviance, but humor throughout. That's actually a very beautiful painting. A quote from his writing: "Reality is plastic. Life is a disease of matter. Art is a disease of life." But again, humor throughout. Bennet never married or had children, but he seemed to have an endless supply of models. This piece has been identified as a girlfriend. I don't know if that's true. That's a charming painting and a storytelling face. So this I would call Thanks, Dad. Bennet took great care with the money left to him. With careful shepherding of funds and no foolish spending, and weekly watching Wall Street Week, he managed to leave us a financial history of the stock market with his doodling, incessant doodling to the side. So there's this little bear, and then there's Louis Rukowser. You might recognize some of the others. This was 1984 when the Dow was at 11 something. Very clever. This is a funny picture. This seems to be a comment on his own sexual desires. Something society does not like: a pretty dancer and a married man with great fleshy hands. Innocence and the taker of innocence. The inscription on this piece is the artist as a masked child in a supercar, and the artist as an old man among houses and windows in the houses. So this shows, to me, the stunted maturity of a man with all the haunts, taunts, toys of a 15-year-old boy, reflecting on how he is judged poorly as an older man. And here, himself as Toulouse-Lautrec, the chaser of forbidden beauty and the painter of vice. Bennet was opposites. And at the gallery, we have a show up right now, of Bennet's work. And at the opening, at the entrance, we have a list of Bennet's opposites. And the show is called Nice and Naughty. And it's a perfect title for his show. He was a compilation of seeming opposites. He seemed to be a happy man, yet he would say, "I was born depressed." He said he was too shy to come to his own openings, yet he talked with strangers in public easily and affably. He had no trouble getting up in front of a crowd and cheers and belting out a song during karaoke. He took care of his mother until she died at 103, yet claimed he never had a close relationship with her. He was quite wealthy, yet lived frugally in a self-denying manner. He would frequent some of the shadiest spots in town, but he carried a wad of $100 bills in his pocket for bars and tips, drinks and tips. So that's kind of my story of Bennet. I like to talk about how I met Bennet. I have a frame shop. I had a client who brought in a piece of Bennet's work to be framed. And I made the comment how much I liked him and how I would have liked to have met him, because I had read that he had passed. Well, that person who had the drawings said, "Oh, he hasn't passed." And so apparently it got back to Bennet, because 2 weeks later, he came through the door of my frame shop. And he said, "I'm looking for Marilyn Murdoch." And I said, "Well, I am she." And he dropped to his knee and kissed the hem of my garment. And that was very typical of him, a very gentle, sweet man. And I have a few takeaway points, which would be, that to remember that Bennet loved Portland throughout his commercial art career, and all of his filming and all of his books that he wrote. It was all evident how much he cared for Portland. He was a fine artist who gave us a portrayal of humanity who crossed paths. His life was reflected in his art. And I found a quote from Calvin and Hobbes that I loved. "Virtue isn't better than vice, it's just different." And that could have been Bennet's motto. We went to art openings often, and when he looked at other artists' work, his comments were always about technique and never about content. And I thought that was interesting. All in all, Bennet was kind and gentle, a dear friend who made lousy choices, but I miss him a lot. And like Garth Brooks' song, "I've got friends in low places," Bennet found people at the night much more interesting than the majority of us. And I have to tell you, that man has been talking to me all day long. The phone started ringing at 5 in the morning, and every hour the phone rang and there was no one on the line. And that went on until about 10 o'clock. I've lost pages, dropped pencils that rolled into infinity, ran out of printer ink, loud noises that came from nowhere, and on all day long. So I don't know what he's saying. I think he's just making himself known. So can we give him a hand so he knows he's being thought of?
So now it's time for the panel discussion, but I wanted to kind of gauge the audience. Do you guys need like a 5-minute break? Like, raise your hand if you want a break.
Do it.
Okay, let's do 5 minutes, really quick, because I know it's already kind of late. And then we have a really amazing panel. Let me tease you with it. There was the two of the speakers you just heard, and Joe Erceg is here, and I will tell you all about Joe, but he is basically a madman himself, although he probably won't call himself that. But he's amazing, and I can't wait to hear what he has to say tonight. So 5 minutes, drinks. Been a working designer in Portland for over 5 decades. Is that right? 6? 5? Almost 6. After graduating from the Museum Art School, which is now PNCA, he knew all 3 men to varying degrees and is a veritable madman himself. He knows how to set type manually, and he knows how to work, and he knows what this is. A camera lucida, which I think I said that correctly. So Joe, I thought we would kick things off with you. Can you share your own story, how you came to be a designer in Portland, and what it was like starting out with these men?
Excuse me. First, I have to correct.
I think you have to do closer.
Closer.
Yeah.
I'm actually a graduate of the University of Portland. I took some electives in design at the Museum Art School when it was located in the lower areas of the Art Museum. And I was, as a high school kid, early college kid, I was interested in automobile design. I didn't know anything about graphic design. So I wrote down to Los Angeles Art Center, and I showed them some of my sketches of automobiles, and I said, am I good enough to be accepted down there? And they said yes. And I said, do you give any kind of tuition support? I said yes. Well, I couldn't go to LA, no question about that, so I took this catalog to the Museum Art School, talked to the dean. I said, do you have a class like automobile design? Well, kindly said, no, we don't have anything like that. But he said, we have a graphic design course. You want to take that? And I said, yeah, okay, I'll take that. Well, I was in the graphic design course for like 2 days, and I knew immediately that's what I wanted to do. It was taught by Doug Lynch. Unfortunately, there's not much was talked about him tonight, but he was probably one of the premier designers in Portland. And through the few classes that I had at the Museum Art School with the instructors that they had at the time, I devoted really and feel very blessed that I had a 60-year life in design. And I'm still working in design, and I love it. And my son here has worked for me for 20 years, and we both started pre-computer days. You had to count type, you had to be able to know how it was going to fit, then order it, then be able to put it into a layout. My son started that before the computers came on. Subsequently, when the computers came on, I still design on a drawing board, do my sketches. I kind of count my type. I figure out what I need, and I turn it over to my son, and he executes it in the computer. So that's 60 years of going from when Portland had no 4-color presses. There's 1-color press. If you wanted 4-color, they ran it through 3 times. At the start of my career, they didn't run black because that was an extra press run, and that cost extra money. So they just ran no black, just cyan, magenta, and yellow, and they just overlapped it, made a fairly lousy black. And so you had to learn things, really, skills that I don't have in a computer, but you had to know how to prepare a paste up. That's the way I got started. Nobody knew me as a designer. The agencies hired me to do mechanical paste ups because I could draw an exquisite line with a ruling pen. I could draw arcs. I could join the arcs to a straight line. I could do clean mechanical paste ups. They then allowed me to do a little bit of design work. Slowly but surely, I gained a clientele. And the skills, I think the skills that you needed back then would have been very difficult for a lot of people who just depend on a computer today because it was a little more difficult. I don't have the computer skills. I have to rely on people like my son. But it was a wonderful time, and I don't regret learning it all from day one to where I'm at today.
And what about your introduction to Bennet and Charles?
When I got out of art school, which was in 1955, Doug Lynch got me a part-time summer job at the Oregonian in the art department, cleaning up photos, doing little drawings, etc. When that job ended, the precursor to Studio 1030, which you saw projected up on the screen here, on some of the things and some of the people, there was another studio called Artwork Associates. It was run by Doug Lynch, with Don McGregor, Stanley Putnam, Billy Eaton, John Strachey, organized by Spence Gill. That was the primo studio, art studio in town. This was 1955. They asked me to join them as an apprentice, 85 cents an hour. Pretty good. So I was there, and I had a little stall, maybe Square, and a very short time thereafter, this young fellow named Bennet Norrbo, as an illustrator, came in and he shared a space right across from me. So I knew Bennet Norrbo from 1956 until he passed away. Bennet was one of the most gifted of all the artists I have ever known. We both had a love of miniature scale-modeled cars, like Ferraris and Bugattis, about that big. And we'd communicate over the last 6 years of his life. I look at these catalogs that show all of these cars, and also scale model airplanes. We both had a love for that. And I would send him my catalogs, and I would talk to him every few months, and I'd say, Bennet, do you still have those catalogs? He says, Joe, I look through them all the time. I read everything in there. And if you can remember, well, that's not it, but some of the paintings, every one of them has an airplane or an automobile in them. We discussed, well, did you buy this one? Did you buy that one? And some of these models cost $300-400. These are not toys. These are highly skilled models, 1/18 in scale, etc. And Bennet was kind of a crazy guy, but I have some of his paintings. I do not know too much about Byron. I never worked with Byron. I did work with Charles. These are wonderful men. They meant a lot to the design community in this city. I came in just underneath. They, not quite an older generation, but 50 years older than me. So they were the people I looked up to and the generation that I started with. It might be of interest to you that there are 3 people that worked in Studio 1030 in 1958-59. One was Frank Rohr, who started Young and Rohr. The other was Mark Norander, who also started an agency called Porter, Perrin, and Norander. So out of that studio came 2 top-notch art directors who did very well in their business. I became a state freelance designer all my life. I still have a studio down in Old Town. My primary work is for colleges and universities at the present time, and designed many books with Joan Campf here. Some massive 3-volume history books, for example, filled with glorious pictures from about 1850 about the logging industry. And Joni went back there and spent 8 years of her life digging up this material. And I had the privilege of putting it together. This is a camera lucida. It's a torture instrument, but you see what the man is doing there. He has a little device in which he puts in a lens, and he pins his artwork up on a wall. He looks through this lens, and it projects that artwork out to a piece of paper so that he can draw what he sees, either as a start of an illustration or to place a photograph in a particular spot in your layout. I spent many hours with that device. It is now a collectible item, which is worth $200. Fantastic tool, really.
Okay, yeah. I hear that the Studio 1030 photo, let's rewind history here, has you in it. And it also had Charles in it. I forgot to mention this. So, which one are you?
I'm a tall, skinny guy in the back.
Tall, skinny guy in the back. Yeah, the tallest one. You haven't changed a bit. And then Charles Politz is the front right. Is that correct? Yes. Okay, and then Bennet is...
I don't see Bennet there.
Which one is he, Marilyn? On the left side, the third one in, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, third one in. And oh, I forgot. This leads me to my next question perfectly, which is, we all are familiar with the show Mad Men, and it's in the title, you know, the word men, and it was a male-dominated industry, as evidenced by this photo. And except there's one lone woman in there. There she is. So I wanted to actually ask this question of Joe and Joan. I know you were later, you know, your career was later, but if you could start with you, Joe, speak to women in advertising. Did it exist? Is she
No, she was.
Peggy? Is she a Peggy?
No, she was the office worker.
There you go.
There was in the precursor to Studio 1030 was Artwork Associates. Millie was probably one of the few women that I knew that were actually working as commercial artists. We call ourselves commercial artists. At the time, and she did children's books and things like that. Very, very beautiful drawings. Other than that, no, I didn't. I didn't do advertising. That wasn't. I didn't work for agencies except. No, there were very few in the business. Not that I can recall.
And Joe, do you want to speak to your own experience?
Well, actually, I just want to take a minute. Can I just?
Yeah.
This is a little kind of odd segment. There's a little lady sitting over here, and her name is Iko Politz. She is littler than me, and that's little. Iko Politz is Charles's wife. If there was a perfect partner for Charles, it was Iko. You know, we talk about these guys, and as we know, women, it takes two. And this person was the other end of that man. And in her life, she not only gave Charles the companionship, but she also, in her own right, was a beautiful, artistic woman. They lived in a gorgeous home. They together bought beautiful artwork. When Charles would go through areas where it was like, I don't want to do, it was Iko who supported him. You know, I think we just continually forget the other end of artists. And Carol was mentioned with Byron, and, you know, to my regret, I didn't mention Iko. I think you should stand up, Iko, turn around, and say, I'm Iko Politz.
You don't want the question? Okay. Yeah, I definitely want some audience questions as well. So all these men had rich creative lives outside of work, and we touched a little bit about them, about their hobbies, their interests, their inventions. Do you guys have anything to add to that conversation? I know there was some film skits that used to be performed. Okay. Did Carol leave? Okay, next question. Supposedly, yes, there was some, there's a stash of videotapes that might be gone now, but multiple men had them that they would get together and shoot video and make little skits and for their own creative enjoyment for no other reason than to play with the new technology.
They were very funny men, and Homer was the leader of that band.
Yeah, Homer.
Yeah, Homer Green. That's where Matt got his humor, was from his father. His father, you know, because his father was a genius. He was a great writer, he was a filmmaker in his own right. And so I think Matt just sort of took his family and turned it into The Simpsons.
Okay, so let's talk about fashion. So much has been said about, well, in reference to Byron and Charles, that they took great care in the way they presented themselves.
Handsome men. You know, Byron always had the exact right, handkerchief in his pocket. Charles wore these gorgeous shirts, always beautifully, just impeccable. You look at the art world today and, here I am running around in a pair of sandals and jeans and, trying to feel arty at 71 years old. They were gorgeous. They were handsome men. Everything was always tailored. They would never make a presentation when they weren't looking just perfectly put together. This guy, too.
What happened in the 80s?
He threw the suit away.
Why don't we ask, see if there's any questions?
Yeah. So do you guys want to probably shout out the answers, or we have a mic? Ryan, do you want to run around the mic? Okay. So if you raise your hand, Ryan will run you a mic.
Hi, so I feel like today we are so hyper-connected and aware of what's happening everywhere in the world, especially as designers. We get sort of influence from studios and other agencies and just people we admire from all over the place. Pre-internet, and you're doing these creative endeavors and pursuing design. I guess how did stuff happening on the East Coast influence what was going on in Portland? And how did that happen? And kind of where did you pick up those influences?
I have a huge collection of CA magazines, graphies, other various magazines which I've gotten from other people's collections. I have graphies, probably one of the first issues printed. So I really was able to see almost everything that was done on a national scale of quality, because it would sooner or later appear in a magazine. Plus I have a full collection of upper lower case that was a tabloid newspaper which came out for like 20 years. And it was such an elegant publication that if you wanted to find out how a new typeface that was just being issued looked like, you couldn't do better than look at that magazine and see how they designed their layouts and had the best designers and the best illustrators put things in there. So we knew we were in the East Coast. We knew who Milton Glaser was, my God, and Herb Lugallen and Seymour Chwast and guys like Richard Mayev. We knew all of those people. In fact, we kind of strove to be like them. At least I tried to succeed, but they were people we looked up to. Milton Glaser came out here and made a presentation at the old PCBA, which is a avant-garde art gallery here in town for 20 years. He had a show there, and I was fortunate to have him come to my house afterwards. And to meet the great man, Milton Glaser, was quite a thrill. And my son Matt went back to visit him several years ago. He got a signed poster from Milton of the Bobby Dylan poster for Bobby Dylan poster. So we had a chance. I pulled all those magazines. Finally, I had to quit because it made me kind of sick, because I knew I couldn't get those kinds of jobs. I couldn't get those kinds of clients. Didn't get paid like they did.
Other questions?
I actually have two questions. Is it me? Oh, sure. I don't think I need this, but
You might.
anyway. Would you mind giving the full name of the woman that you cited as the writer and illustrator of children's books?
It was Millie E-A-T-O-N.
Millie Eaton?
Millie Eaton.
Right, okay. And then, are any of you able to talk about the American Advertising Museum and what happened to that collection in Portland?
I really don't know.
I spoke to Jim McDonald about that, and he said that it went to a Minneapolis museum, except for a few pieces that are Portland specific, and they are in the Oregon Historical Society, and I viewed them. You have to go to the research library and request I was going to see if there's anything relevant to these men, but there really wasn't. It's all pre-1930s, and there's some amazing things in there. Gorgeous pieces, so it wasn't relevant for this event, but yeah, maybe in the future. There's definitely some interesting work there, but since it was the American Advertising Museum, not just Portland work, it went to a Minneapolis museum, is what I was told.
I think one of the great signs that they have in that museum, which I think is probably at the Oregon History Society now, is the great Greyhound image that was at the top of the Greyhound bus station when it was uptown by the Hilton Hotel. That gorgeous thing they had up there. Well, I'm a neon collector, so is my son. So I couldn't get that in my house, but it was gorgeous.
Questions?
Well, I was talking to these guys a little bit earlier, but I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what you maybe miss about designing maybe pre-computer and what has made your life better with the computer.
Oh, no doubt.
You still work on the board. That's right.
I still work on the board. I draw. I'm very precise about what I turn over to my son. He executes it in the computer. But I know what I'm doing. I don't have to count type anymore. If they set it this way to see what it looks like. But what was your question again?
I think my question is actually redundant, so.
I don't regret the computer at all. In fact, I was in the studio and I was with a couple of the people, my son and my colleague, Clyde Van Cleve. I was the one who said, let's go down and take classes on the computer before anybody else said it. The amount of paste up I used to do for college catalogs was enormous, huge. So I'd have to design all week, then I'd have to go to all weekend long to do the paste ups. That means lining up every board, like you do in a computer, except I have to hand draw in every page, every column, and then do the paste up. So I don't regret losing that at all. Sir.
I want to say something about, I think that the early graphic designers, as you probably saw with Bennet and with Charles and with Byron, they were at their core artists. That's where they began. And their work reflects that. That doesn't mean that today with graphic design and computers that there aren't the same kind of people, but it just seems to me that people were drawn to graphic design. You were drawn, through cars as art, and then graphic design sort of grew out of that. And I think it made their work pretty special, quite different. Which isn't to say the work today isn't brilliant, because there's just some brilliant work. But I think we all stand on somebody else's shoulders, and it's a nice place to stand. Great work in the past, fabulous stuff coming now, just really fabulous.
Any final questions? Does anyone have a story to share, like a new Byron? Some folks might have left already. New Byron or Charles or Bennet?
There you go. So, one last question. That was loud, sorry. So, we, graphic designers and creatives, have really proliferated with the computers, that there's just a lot of us now. I guess my question is, how do you see design now? I really like that there's some positivity behind the way you view it. I think that as I'm 42, so I'm sort of like I see droves of young people coming up wanting to be graphic designers who know Photoshop and they're ready, they want to go, and they're not all well prepared. But I'd love to hear, if you just have some kind of good, old-timey cussing at us or anything else to sort of, your thoughts about sort of the state of graphic design and what that role is now.
In answer to your question as best I can answer, collect a lot of design books as well as magazines. The books that I really like, and one in specific, we probably put out 2 or 3, is by Pentagram out of San Francisco with Kit Heinrichs. The difference between what I see in their work is that I don't get a sense that was put together by the computer. I know it was production was by the computer, but they put it together with the skill that I would say came from the drawing board. And it didn't have any of the leave it up to the computer to set the type. They handle the type, the line breaks, the kerning, the leading, the type size, the type kind of combinations with their skills that they probably developed a long time ago, and it's reflected in their work. I can't say anything more highly than that about Pentagram and other places, such as Upper Lowercase Tabloid, which I referred to earlier. And of course, if you look at any of Milton Glazer's work, an awful lot of individual personal illustrations there. But when my son visited him, Milton doesn't use a computer. He draws like he always did and tells his people on the computer to do what he wants, the way he wants them. Right, Matt? Yeah, I have a whole collection of upper lowercase. It's probably wrong. I've been around a long time. Avant-garde? Yeah, Avant-garde had about 20 issues, exquisitely illustrated and designed magazine. Odd format, and it either didn't make it commercially, but it sure was beautiful. It had great artists in there, like Richard Lindner would be on the cover of one, for example. You know what Richard Lindner is, don't you? Okay. Great painter. Great New York painter.
All right. Yeah.
Did you know a painter named Erwin McFadden?
Erwin McFadden taught me lettering.
Awesome.
And I learned a lot from him. He was the first to introduce Helvetica typeface in the city of Portland. That's another set of magazines which I have, all 20 or 30 editions of Die Neue Grafik, which is a Swiss publication which utilized the international style, all done in Helvetica, which they call grotesque. And it espoused the principles of the international style or Swiss design by Joseph Müller Brockmann and Karl Gerstner and Carlo Vivarelli. This is a seminal publication, and Erwin McFadden was the one who started bringing that into this country. He got the subscription from Switzerland, and then he taught me lettering, and then he conducted little private classes in finished lettering. And I don't know if you followed Erwin's career.
Well, he's a swell painter. I think he's a swell painter.
Yes, he's a constructivist painter, exquisite. He's passed away several years ago. And his wife, Mary Ellen McFadden, if you look up on the internet, you'll see she's carrying on his same style of work. His work was beautiful. His lettering was exquisite. He was always thinking. He was a very progressive, almost, beyond most people's ability to follow him in terms of his political, progressiveness. Yeah, Erwin, great man.
It's a pretty bold statement to say he introduced Helvetica to Portland. Like that, it's just a crazy statement.
Well, at the time, it was not used very much. It just wasn't.
All right, folks. thank you so much for coming. I have a few thank yous, and I did want to also plug the exhibit in the back. Feel free to stick around and have some drinks. The exhibit in the back has some hidden gems that I thought I would share with you so you can look for them. So there is the 60 decades of Charles Politz's New Year's cards back there in an album. And his essay on learning how to iron. So we talked earlier about clothing and how it had to be just so. There's an essay about him learning how to iron. It's quite humorous. You might want to check that out. Byron Ferris's joke book, and his commercial art book that he authored, Phil's Guide to Commercial Art. Bennet Norrbo's original Jantzen drawings and his unfinished comic books. The aforementioned Beaverton one is back there. You can page through it. It's fabulous. So I wanted to give a special thanks to Aiko, as previously introduced, and to Carol Ferris, and to Joan for letting me come to their houses and interview them and rummage through their closets, essentially. That's what it took to get this together, and they were very open and willing to let me do so. So thank you very much for helping me put this together and for participating as well. I think that's all I have. There's some paintings for sale, Bennet Norrbo's paintings. So as Marilyn mentioned, they're all on display at Kadiyama Framing currently. And there's a few in the back there, and some of he authored a book as well that's back there. If you're interested in purchasing anything, find Marilyn and she can take care of it for you. And the funds for the paintings go to PAIR, which is Creatively Mentoring Homeless Youth. They're a fantastic nonprofit organization, and that was indicated in his will, that the money go to PAIR. So that's very lovely. All right, thank you all very much for coming.